In these videos, we shed light on vague areas of the GDPR and data protection. For example, we look at the squabble around what constitutes personal data versus personally identifiable information. We look at what constitutes an international data transfer. We look at security incidents versus data breaches. We look at the use of Google services, ChatGPT, or how it's used in organizations, and a host of many other topics. Hopefully, these topics will help demystify data protection and GDPR compliance for you and your organization. We are TechGDPR, a data protection consulting firm in the heart of Berlin and serving clients across several industries and located across different continents. So when does an international data transfer take place? While the GDPR does not expressly define what an international data transfer is, international data transfers likely occur when there is a flow of personal data to and from countries outside the Union and international organizations according to the GDPR Recital 101. A guideline from the European Data Protection Board of May 2022 provides 3 cumulative criteria to qualify a processing operation as an international data transfer. These are: the data exporter, who could either be a data controller or data processor, is subject to the GDPR for the given processing. The data exporter discloses by transmission or makes personal data available to a data importer, who could also either be a data controller, joint controller, or data processor. The data importer is in a third country, irrespective of whether or not this data important is subject to the GDPR for the given processing in accordance with Article 3. These 3 conditions must be met to qualify a processing activity, like sharing data, as an international transfer. In determining whether an international data transfer has occurred, the specific data processing activity must be taken into consideration. This simply means that an international data transfer does not happen on a per-company basis, but per processing activity. The EDPB guidelines puts it more accurately. Pursuant to Article 3, whether or not the GDPR applies must always be assessed in relation to a certain processing operation rather than with regard to a specific entity. So how does an international data transfer happen? There are several scenarios leading to international data transfers. The EDPB guidelines provide over 10 such cases. For the purpose of this video, I'll highlight 5 of the most common use cases for organizations. The first one: a controller is established in the EU. When a data controller established in the EU makes use of a third country data processor to process the personal data of its customers or employees, for example, an international data transfer occurs with respect to the specific processing. So Article 3.1 and Chapter 5 of the GDPR will apply. The second: when a data processor established in the EU makes use of a subprocessor in a third country to process personal data on behalf of a data controller, the flow of data between that processor and the subprocessor amounts to an international data transfer. Again, GDPR Article 3.1 and Chapter 5 will apply. The third one: when an employee of a data controller established in the EU travels to a third country with his work laptop and remotely accesses personal data from that third country, this does not qualify as an international data transfer, since the employee is seen as an extension of the EU controller rather than another organization to which personal data is disclosed. According to EDPB guidelines, any processing, including the remote access and the processing activities carried out by the employee after access, are performed by the EU controller. However, where the employee on a trip to the third country makes personal data available to a data controller or processor in that country, this would amount to an international transfer between the EU controller and that controller or processor in the third country. Therefore, the relevant articles of the GDPR will apply. In either scenario, keep in mind that whether or not an international transfer has occurred will have to be determined on a case-by-case basis, taking into account the unique circumstances of each case. That is, the unique circumstance of each processing activity. The fourth one, when a subsidiary company in the EU discloses personal data of its employees to the parent company in a third country, for example, by storing data in a central HR database, this disclosure qualifies as an international transfer. This is because the subsidiary company, as an employer and acting in its capacity as a data controller, makes personal data available to its parent company in a third country. Note that the provision of the database by the mother company makes it a data processor, but any subsequent accesses and uses of the data for purposes defined by the parent company makes that parent entity a data controller, triggering controller obligations. The fifth one. When a data processor in a third country remotely accesses data of an EU controller, which is also stored in the EU, this access qualifies as an international data transfer. Remote access could be for different purposes, for instance, providing support or software integrations and development. Article 3.1 and Chapter 5 of the GDPR will apply. So what can your organization do if it intends to transfer data? There are several other use cases in which an international data transfer may occur. Some organizations may be internationally transferring data without knowing it. Since the GDPR requires that a transfer impact assessment, TIA, be carried out to assess the risks to the data subject from the transfer of personal data, not knowing that an international transfer of data occurs in your organization can lead to a violation of the GDPR, however unintended. This poses risks to your organization such as loss of public trust and goodwill, missing out on business opportunities, not to mention fines by supervisory authorities. In the next video, we'll discuss transfer impact assessments and the basics around those. If you found this video valuable, hit the subscribe button below and share it with your network. Bye.